Good morning, afternoon, evening, whenever you're listening to this. I have a guest here that I've actually had on the list for quite some time, and I ran into her the other day, and she mentioned my podcast, and I'm like, how have I not had you on? Because basically everything I talk about here, this person just embodies all of that. And so, Ellie Hiller, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Hampton. It was awesome getting to see you at lunch. I love the podcast and I've listened to a good bit of them. So you're doing a great job.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, let's hop right in because I know that you are a lot more than just a CrossFit person, but I know that is a big part of your life. And I just want to start right there. When did you get into CrossFit?
So I'm 26 years old now, and when I was 18 years old, I found CrossFit. It was really just the Google search of, how can I improve in basketball, because I wanted to play basketball in college. And I found a CrossFit gym near me, walked in, and ever since I was hooked. So I've been doing it for about 8 years now.
Wow. Did you start at Leamington?
No, I actually started at CrossFit Birmingham, which is over,
Okay.
in Inverness, but then transitioned to Laminin when I went to Sanford, which is down closer to the university. And it's more of a competitive gym, which is what I was looking for to get into the sports side of CrossFit. Because if people aren't familiar, there's the fitness modality or methodology, and then there's the sport of CrossFit. You do a lot of the same
Yeah.
movement, but very, very different things.
So if a sophomore in high school, they just finished their sophomore season, a girl, she's playing at Briarwood, she's killing it, and she wants to play college basketball. If she came to you now and said, I want to play college basketball, what kind of fitness should I get into? Would you advise her to do CrossFit?
That's a good question. I would yes. And here's the thing, CrossFit is a bunch of movements put together that a lot of people do at their own gym, whether they're doing CrossFit or not, right? CrossFit doesn't
Mhm.
own CrossFit doesn't own the burpee. Like we don't have
Yeah.
patent on that. But I think just the combination with time domains, training explosiveness, aerobic power, you pretty much hit every energy system in CrossFit. And so thinking back on my sports and athletic career, if I had done CrossFit leading, starting in junior high and then through high school, I could jump higher, I could run faster, I'd be stronger. So I think for an athlete, high school athlete, play sports. Don't stop playing sports, but do CrossFit or that type of training to supplement and improve your athleticism.
Yeah. I like what you said about CrossFit doesn't own a lot of those movements. It's just putting a lot of them together. I
Yeah.
bet, with you starting 8 years ago, the sport is just growing rapidly every year. So I imagine it's come quite a long way.
Yeah. It's still in its infancy. I want to say the first CrossFit Games was like 2007 or 2008, and that's the Olympics of the CrossFit world essentially. So there's a big qualifying process to get up to the CrossFit Games, but it is growing a ton now. I liken it to UFC. If anyone watches, UFC or any type of like fighting, which I don't, but I'm kind of familiar with how it's run, and it's getting a lot of the same sponsors. And I think now it's gaining some traction. They just need to get a little bit more professional and figure out some of like how they're going to rank athletes. And they need to get a little bit more money behind them before we really call ourselves like a true professional sport. But we're getting there. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So when did you realize, okay, one, I'm pretty good at this, and also I'm about to go all in.
Yeah. So it's funny because I look at that book behind you, The Grit, Angela Duckworth. That's one of my favorite books. I read it when I was in high school, right around the time I started training in CrossFit. And the main draw for me in CrossFit is that you're gonna be as good as you want to be. It's one of those sports where work ethic really has a good return on investment because you can always train more. There's a time obviously for rest and recovery, but with basketball, I worked really, really hard, but I was not the best. I was only going to get so good. And I don't say that to have a fixed or a limited mindset to quote the book, but it was more so, I started basketball when I was in junior high. I wasn't very skilled. I worked my butt off. I would win all the conditioning workouts and the suicide sprint stuff, but that didn't get me any, more college offers. I needed to become a better shooter and more skilled, right? Uh, and then with CrossFit, I was like, man, I can really apply myself in this sport, work harder than everyone else, and just be really essentially more gritty, and it will pay off, and I can make it really far. And so that was the big attraction for me with CrossFit, just compared to really any, even marathon running. Like I could have gotten into that, and while grit is really obviously equally as important in that sport, I just found it to suit me a little bit more in CrossFit, and that's why it's so addicting, is because you just see all these returns all over in all the different movements and skills, because it's a combination of so many different things that it becomes quite addicting, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, because I run a lot and I've done CrossFit too. I don't anymore, but I would say with running, I mean, you can always get better at running day
Mhm.
after day, week after week. But I will say with CrossFit, I mean, is there a number of how many, I mean, do you know technically how many movements there are? I mean, but like
There,
50?
I literally have no clue. There's more than 50. It's insane because if you take the rope climb, for example, there's many different variations of even a rope climb alone that you have to train. We go seated legless. You go rope climb with your legs. You'll do a rope climb legless where you can just jump into it, but you don't have to start from a seated position. Legless up and legless down. So it's like you have to be able to train literally every possible variation of a movement, which makes it you're just a super generalist. You have to hit everything all the time. But then there's also that component of adaptability that CrossFit wants to test of, all right, we're going to throw this movement at you in a competition that you've actually never tested before. Um, and it's who can adapt and who's an athlete and who can just figure it out on the spot. And I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to think. There's been over the years several random ones. Like, what was maybe this had been in the games before, but I remember watching a couple of years ago those sandbags where they got up to like several hundred pounds. That looked horrible. Maybe they
That,
had done that before. I don't know.
the strength test, are you talking about the one where they just had to lift it one time?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So that's a great example. We don't typically ever test anything beyond 150-pound sandbags for girls and 200 pounds for guys. And then at the games that year, they're like, hey, instead of a squat clean ladder, we're going to do sandbag to the shoulder going up to 300 pounds, I think, for the girls. And, or yeah, no, it was like 250 for the girls or something. And then 350 for the guys. And some of the athletes just figured it out. And I'm like, that is insane. So yeah, and it's fun to watch because you see the struggle and you see these amazing athletes figuring it out right before your eyes, and it's very relatable in that way. And I think that's part of why this the fitness modality of CrossFit does so well after the games. Is these people are just sitting on their couch flipping on ESPN, and they're like, "Whoa, this athlete is really struggling," and then they figure it out, and I can do that too. And I think that's a really cool part of CrossFit.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's all different levels, and I love just the community aspect of it because there's a lot of people that their biggest hobby may not be fitness. And so, but when they can show up to a gym and everybody else is doing it, then I feel like people are a lot more motivated to do it. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
so you mentioned reading a book in high school. I didn't get into this world of like, thinking about grit and having a growth mindset. I didn't do that until even really after college, which I wish that I would have earlier on. I just was like, I'm not going to read books or I'm not going to work hard. I just want to go strictly off of like natural talent in sports and see how far I can get. Like
Yeah.
you, you are different. Like I imagine, especially in high school, you probably didn't have a ton of girlfriends or even like guy friends who were reading those books. Is that right? I mean, you had to be standing out.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I think it is a lot of is it yeah, nature or no nurture and nature, but
Mm-hmm.
I just wasn't as talented, and so that was kind of I had to read and find an edge in the mental side of things, and then even just figuring out how to just be tougher than other people, because all I wanted was to excel in sports. I was a
Hmm.
good student, but sports was just my where I wanted to spend a lot of my life, and now I'm thankfully getting to do that. But um you hear some of my favorite athletes like Kobe Bryant and um some tennis players that people probably wouldn't know, but they just talk often about, you find the edge in your mind. And so it was very cool to me to hear that and be like, okay, I can't control my talent, but I can read as many books as possible and try to find an edge on people that way. So, and I just like to
Mm.
read. But no one, you're right. Like, no one, even our age right now, I feel like people kind of scoff at some of these books with mindset. And I hate the word self-help, so I don't really want to call it that. But
Yeah.
um yeah, it's interesting. I don't find many people who enjoy it. So that's why I like your podcast, is because you talk about all of these principles, and it's a good reminder because you read these books and then it's easy to forget everything. So you give us a good dose of it.
Hey, well, thanks. You mentioned something about having an edge in your mind, and this is something that I have struggled with over the years. But when I watch, whether it's runners or CrossFit, I mean, the best of the best, they obviously work their tail off.
Yeah.
Sure, they have a bunch of like natural talent and good genetics and everything, but they work harder than everybody else too. But there's also this edge in the like I know Tia, some of the other girls, obviously like I feel like Matt Frazier, Rich Froning, like obviously I know a bunch of the other guys, but when I look back to those guys who I kind of got into CrossFit watching, I had the sense that they would rather die than lose in an event. Like they literally were going to die. And
Yeah.
so there's that part that I wonder how much that muscle can be trained. And like for you, how, is that a strength of yours? Like, do you have that like ultra competitive spirit in you where even if you may not win, but you're like, I literally am going to give it my all? Because where I'm getting at is I've felt myself when I start getting to that like 90%, I'm like, you have to quit. You have to quit. You're gonna die. Like, and then I usually just give up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, these are great questions. Have you ever read the book How Bad Do You Want It? Or have you
No,
heard?
but maybe I need to.
Okay. Especially as a runner, I think you would love this book. But I forget who writes it. I want to say it's something Fitzgerald, but um he talks about this concept of the central governor, which is, in our brain. And it's basically, you hear a lot about how, okay, your mind's going to quit before your body does as a protective mechanism. And you can essentially override your central governor if you train it and you are careful enough, I guess. But you can push past that wall of where your brain is saying, "Hey, stop! Like you're pushing too hard." And that always resonated with me. Of okay, it's very cool to actually find your limit, and by that I mean when you override your brain and then your body actually is like, no, I can't go any further. And that doesn't mean you're gonna pass out or whatever. It's just, going to failure. And in CrossFit, we're able to experience that a lot of, I this past weekend at semifinals, I unintentionally went to failure, and I could not clean and jerk 125 anymore, which for me is not a difficult weight. And it's a very you don't want to do it often, but when you're in competition, that ability to be able to tell your brain like, "Hey, I'm okay. Worst case scenario, I still don't die." I have a coach who's helped me with a little bit of the mindset going into this competition this past weekend, and she's a good friend. And we were just kind of talking through the events, and the first one is a lot of running, and it hurts really, really bad. And she was like, "What are you gonna tell yourself when it hurts?" And I was like, I have a lot of options, but what do you think? And she said, just tell yourself two things. Everyone's hurting, everyone's feeling the same way, and you're not going to die. And
Mm.
wait, that's pretty simple, but that's true. Your brain starts telling you, panicking, like, oh, shoot, like, I'm going to die. And it's like, no, you're not. You can push through it. And so I don't even know if that answers your question, but there's a time and place for pushing that hard. but then you have to be okay with like, yeah, I'll die for points, but even then, uh, everyone is doing the same thing, and so you just have to see where the chips fall after that. But CrossFitters are a group of deranged individuals, honestly. It's a lot of people that love to herd, and it's kind of weird. Like, you just have to understand everyone's kind of that crazy, and it might turn out in your favor, but you might crash and burn, and that's part of the fun of watching the sport is you see a lot of implosions and and people that just
Yeah.
go fully to failure. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
No, that absolutely answers my question. Yeah, gotta find the pain cave. That actually, I feel like this is similar in like the running world or in the CrossFit world. This was always slightly a pet peeve of mine. I don't know if you are like this or resonate with it, but you get to the gym and I don't. I'm sure you're not always doing the same thing as just like a class at Laminin. I'm sure you're doing other stuff, but like, do you ever? I felt like there's this sense of the people who like meant business and were getting after it. They looked what was on the whiteboard and they were like, okay, let's go do it. And I felt like everybody else was like, oh, this is gonna suck, and they like spend 10 minutes complaining about how the workout's gonna be terrible. I don't know. Maybe that's just a thing that people do, but I felt like I always tried to say like, no, let's get after it. Come on, even though I knew it was gonna suck. I don't know. Do you? I feel like everybody's always complaining.
well, that's a good point because I'm sure you've read books that talk about this, but I've learned that if I say something out loud, my brain is going to really follow suit. And there's a way to structure my language that really helps from a psychological standpoint. Like if I'm about to do a workout, I'm like, this is gonna suck, this is gonna hurt so bad. I'm telling my body that too. And even something like when I'm running and it's really hurting, I don't know if you've tried this. I'll smile. Like I'll just make myself smile for a second, and I've had this pain face on, and I'm like, no, smile for a second. And then my body kind of relaxes. I'm like, I'm okay. Like I'm telling my brain, you're okay. And so there's a lot of psychology behind working out where I'm like, shoot, if I'm complaining, which I do, I fall into this trap. I tell my training partners, I'm like, call me out on that. Because I'm just kind of making it harder for myself. So I love that attitude that you have of like, let's go. Like whatever it is, I'm gonna rise to the occasion. Sets you up for success. Even if you know it's gonna suck, just lie to yourself.
Yes. Okay, I should have done that this morning. There's a crew that runs on Tuesday mornings at the Sanford track. Go Dogs! And
Yeah.
I was doing some 400s, and I should have been smiling on those last few, but I was doing the opposite of smiling. I
You know,
think my face, in fact, is still red from it. Um,
yeah. Yeah, more. I don't think I'd smile on a 400. That's too. I think I'd be in too much pain. But the long distance, it works pretty well. Just flash a quick smile, see if it helps.
yeah. So everyone who is not familiar with the sport of CrossFit, making it to the semifinals is unbelievable and incredible. And I know that you just did that. I'm sure you could talk for hours about this, but maybe walk us through the experience of making it there, and because I know you've been working at this for years, and so I just want to hear a little bit about
Yeah, it's been. Where do I start with this? So CrossFit, there's basically three buckets of different things that you'll be tested on. It's weightlifting, cardio, aerobic capacity essentially, and then skills gymnastics specifically. So I am pretty, I would say, elite at the aerobic and the skill side, but the weightlifting side for me has always been a big struggle. If you've seen any of the CrossFit girls, they're huge. They're massive. And a lot of them are 5'8", 165 pounds, and I'm 5'1", 130. And so it gives me a lot of benefit um, on the gymnastics and the skill side, but I'm far, far, far behind in weightlifting. And weightlifting is, as you know, it's one of those things that's a slow, tedious process unless you're going to do drugs, which I'm not, and you can't in CrossFit, although some people get through the cracks. You have to be so patient, and it takes years to put 5 pounds on a lift, right? And so um for me specifically, I've been working at this for 8 years, just really trying to get strong enough. And so depending on what workouts come out, I have if it's not as heavy on the weightlifting side, I'll probably make it semifinals. In this past year, there was weightlifting, but I ended up qualifying. And so all this to say, Um, it's a ton of work, and you're not guaranteed anything. They don't care who you are. No matter how many times you've made it to semifinals, you're not promised another qualifying spot, right? It doesn't matter what your worldwide ranking is. You don't get an invite. You have to just show up the one qualifying weekend, and if you're sick, sorry, like figure it out. And so, for me, thankfully, quarterfinals, which is the qualifying leading into semifinals, went really well. I ended up comfortably making the top 40, which is who goes to semifinals. And getting to my specific semifinal, it was in Knoxville, Tennessee. I was competing against Tia Toomey, who you mentioned earlier. She's like the six-time CrossFit Games champion. She's so dominant. She'll probably go down as the greatest of all time in CrossFit, up there with Matt Frazier. Competed against her, Brooke Wells, Danielle Brandon, Alexis Raptis, all the top people in the sport. And so for me going into this, I'm like, okay, let's be realistic. I am not a full-time athlete like them. I have a full-time job, and I'm not. I train as hard as I can, but realistically, I'm not gonna probably beat any of them. I'm gonna try, but it was a really cool experience to be able to go into this professional sport now as someone who's not a professional athlete. And I was thinking about the whole process of, okay, what is a win for me this weekend? What am I going to walk away from and be like, that's my goal? To win the whole thing was not it. We knew Tia was going to win. And I found myself really, really grateful for the fact that, like, NBA players, you don't get to be an average person and just go play an NBA game. You don't get to be a recreational country club tennis player. I don't care how good you are. You can't just like go play a professional tennis tournament. So I was like, man, this is really cool. And that was for me what I was trying to think about most of the weekend. But all that to say, it was really weird for me, like warming up next to Tia. Wait, am I a professional athlete because I'm competing against her? Like, I don't know. So it was a really cool experience. I don't. There's more I can answer, but that's kind of just like the overarching theme I walked away from over the weekends. I get to tell my kids this.
That's so cool. And I mean, you could have a fixed mindset about, oh well, I don't do drugs, or I'm not genetically as large as some of these other girls, and so it's hard to lift all this weight and everything. But it's cool to see you like stick with it. How did I mean, brag on yourself if you want to for a minute on some of like the skills or more cardio based events? Did you do well in some of those?
Yeah, and I seriously would. I'm not trying to have like false humility or anything, but a lot of I honestly think I let the competition uh throw me off a little bit of my training paces a little bit. And so a lot of the workouts I did implode on. I came out and I was like, I'm going to rely on adrenaline and see if I can beat Brooke Wells in this workout, and ended up crashing and burning in a few. So there were a few that went, I didn't execute well, but then there were a few, like there was a handstand walk rowing workout. I'm a shorter girl, so I didn't think I was going to do that great on the rowing one. Ended up doing well on that one, and most of my finishes were around the 20th range. And so that was a little disappointing because I knew based on my training times, a lot of them would have been like top tens. But that's sport. You have to be able to understand that, like, all right, training is typically a good curated environment, and in competition, you have so many different factors that you can't control. So figure out how to adjust to that. But and then there was one, the snatch ladder, which is a lift. It's an Olympic lift where you bring the this, but the barbell from the ground to overhead. And I did way worse in that than in training. I got dead last in that event. And I remember like walking off the competition floor, it was embarrassing. It was very embarrassing. Like I did really bad, but then way worse than I thought it would be. And my dad, I remember he texted Sean, my husband, and was like, he said Ellie is a tough girl to put herself out there and be okay failing like that. And I knew exactly. I was thankful my dad said that. It wasn't insulting to me. But I think back a lot about, all right, like what am I going to take from this perceived failure? And I think that is the only way, looking back on my athletic career and whatever it is, the only way I've ever improved in anything is what other people would perceive as a failure. And so I think it's cool that I'm not afraid to put myself out there and fail. And I think one, people recognize that, and as much as I feel like everyone's judging me, like, oh, she shouldn't be out there, she doesn't deserve to be out there, she couldn't make it past the snatch ladder. I really think in a way, not to just falsely reframe, but I think it's very inspiring for people to see it like, dang, that's embarrassing, and she's still putting herself out there. So that was pretty. That's just the way I'm trying to think about it, at least.
That's so cool. I love that text from your dad. It makes me think about there's a guy named Ryan Leake, who's like a speaker and he's written a few books. And I'm trying to think, he has a book about failure, but like the main quote from it is, "I'm willing to fail at what most people won't even try." And
Oh,
and that's you. You know, how good is that?
I love that. I love that. Yeah, Kobe Bryant has a quote. It doesn't exactly apply, but it's always stuck with me. He talks about how his dad, at a young age, um, when Kobe was playing like youth basketball, apparently there was a game, a summer league, where he never scored a point, and it was really embarrassing for him. And he was crying to his dad, and he was just like so upset. And his dad basically told him like, I will, love you no matter what if you never score another point the rest of your life. And Kobe said in that moment, as soon as he knew he had his dad's security and the love of his dad, whether he was a good basketball player or not, he was able to go into any situation willing to fail because he was secure in what actually mattered. And I think that's one of the most loving things you can do as a parent is create a space for your kids to fail and know that, hey, you're still loved. This doesn't define you. But like failing is such a good thing because it's going to motivate you. And Kobe said something cool after that of like, um, of how like he was gonna like fight through it and stuff. I forget what it was, but I'm like, man, how cool is that? Like failure is a good thing because it motivates us to improve. So
Yeah. Ooh, that's good. And yeah, I mean, I think it's in Grit and then maybe in Mindset a little bit, those two books behind me, they talk about as parents the importance of praising effort over talent.
mm,
And that's one thing that I really want to do with my kids because there's going to be things that maybe they're naturally gifted at. And so
yeah,
instead of when they're playing soccer, instead of saying, "You're so fast, you're so good, that goal was amazing," say, like, "I loved how hard you worked. And even though you
mm,
lost the ball, you ran back and got it." Like, I think just starting to teach kids from a young age that just working hard is way more important and that failing is okay, um,
I love
will go a
that.
long way for them.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's
So here's a quick question for you. Can you tell us a little bit about Vulcan Nutrition? And then I have some rapid fire nutrition questions for you, really specifically for some of my female audience because I want to see what you say about them. But what is Vulcan Nutrition?
love it. Vulcan Nutrition, it's a company I started about 5 years ago, nutrition coaching. And our main mission is, or our mission is to help people find something sustainable with nutrition. There's a lot of things out there that'll give you really fast results, but if it doesn't stick, if it's not sustainable, it never really worked in the first place, right? And so we want to help
Mm,
people get off the rat race of diet culture, of the ebbing and flowing, losing a lot of weight, gaining a lot of weight. And then also it's just not a weight loss program only. We want to help people build muscle. You talk about this a lot, Hampton, like, building muscle, eating protein, strength training, all that stuff. That is where I think you can really live one of a happy and healthy life is when you have a capable body without limitations. And I think that's the way, God, even just in his word, like barring any issue we can't control, like we're supposed to be capable and be able to live without
hmm.
limitations because of our physical body. And so my mission is to really just help people find something sustainable with nutrition through one-on-one coaching. So,
That sustainability is super important. And I know that we grow up in a world, and especially as people our age start coming into the scene with your coaching and everything, and we've been brought up in a world of immediate gratification and reels and Amazon, like you start believing that there's just an easy button for everything, and
mm,
there's not. But a lot of this stuff I'm sure that you're teaching, it's not um, what is it? It's pretty it's not simple, but it's pretty easy, you know? Or sorry, it's
it's
not easy,
it's
but it's simple.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, you're exactly right. It really, if we overcomplicate it just so that we can have a market and act like we know all these things that everyone else in the world doesn't know, we're not helping people. Like, the reality is yes, there's definitely things that are complicated in nutrition, but it truly can be simple. And then you can do something simple once you develop habits the rest of your life. Doesn't make it easy, but the simpler we can make it, the better it is for the client.
Yes. All right, here's a question. And I know that you and I are going to be aligned on this answer, but I want them to hear it from you. So I am a 26-year-old girl, and I want to be toned. Uh, and I go to Orange Theory, but I come to Ellie because I don't know. I just want help with nutrition or whatever. And Ellie tells me, have you considered strength training? I assume that you would like tell people to do that. Do you get objections to girls saying like, oh, I don't know about like lifting heavy weights? What would you
Oh,
say to someone that?
all the time. And it's perfect that you use the word toned, because I get that all the time, and I stop them every single time and say, okay, the reality is you're either putting muscle on or you're losing fat. Like, those are the two things that are going to happen. Or you're gaining fat. It's either fat or muscle, right? Being toned is simply adding muscle mass and hopefully losing body fat after that, right? That's how you get toned. Toned only happens with muscle growth, right? It's the shaping of your muscles. And so if you're not going to lift weights, you're not going to get that toned look. So you have to put the muscle under a stressor. And then there's just so many benefits I won't get into of building muscle, but I would say the best thing you can do as a female, or obviously a male, but for females specifically, the best thing you can do is strength train from a health longevity perspective, from a hormonal perspective, and from an aesthetic perspective. Do not be afraid of lifting weights unless you're on drugs, which most people are not. You are not going to get bulky. You are not. I have worked for 8 years to get stronger, and I still, like, I definitely have more muscle than some people want, but it is you're not going to, you can't work hard enough. Or how do I phrase this? Most people don't work hard enough to get bulky, and I try really hard and I'm not bulky. So
It's 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 probably almost offensive to someone like you when someone's like, but I don't want to get bulked up. You're like, I've
trust
been
me.
trying for like 8 years.
Right. I've been, yeah. But I get the people that, like, if you put on a lot of muscle and you don't lose body fat that you probably need to lose, yeah, you'll look bigger. But that most people, if you put on muscle mass, your metabolic rate's going to go up. So you're just going to burn fat as well. So don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of lifting weights. It's the best thing you can do. Heavy weights too.
Mhm. Heavyweight, yes. Another huge part of this, and I've heard you talk about this, is protein. I would imagine most women are typically not eating enough.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Men too, but
Yeah,
most women are not eating near enough, and it's a lot more than you think. I know, Hampton. You're probably. I mean, are you eating your body weight in protein? You probably are.
got to 1 gram per pound. Come on.
Right. Perfect. Yeah. So ideally, it would be eating your ideal body weight in protein. But for ladies, I'm like, hey, just try to start at more than what you're currently eating, but about 70% of your ideal body weight. Start there and build up. And yeah, you won't be as hungry throughout the day. It does so many amazing things. So
Hmm. Recently, and I don't know if she go this direction, but a couple of years ago, I got, into eating enough protein and all this stuff. And I feel like for a while, I was like, oh, well, it's just, calories in, calories out for if you want to gain weight or lose weight and eat enough protein to maintain your muscle mass and all that. But recently, I've realized I'm like, I feel like I was eating way too many like protein bars and stuff. And I don't know what your thoughts are on those, but lately it's a little bit harder and isn't as convenient. But I'm trying to go more like a bunch of like eggs and meat and everything. Cause I'm like, I don't know if I should always just be crushing these like, birthday cake flavored protein bars.
yeah, you bring up a great point. It's kind of something I navigate with clients a lot of, like, all right, if for right now you're just simply not even going to get close to your protein goal without a protein bar or a few, which I'm not really opposed to shakes, especially if you get a high quality protein powder. I think that's amazing, and you actually probably have to have protein
Yeah.
powder in your diet to hit a gram per pound of body weight for most people. But yeah, the ultimate goal is to get away from as much of those factory created foods as possible. And that's not a bad thing to eat them, right? But the more you can get your protein through eggs and meat and all of the food that God made, he knows our bodies better than anyone else. He knows the vitamins and minerals that our body needs, and that's already in the whole food that he created. So you're gonna feel better, you're gonna be less hungry, and you're gonna get more of the other nutrients that you need through the whole food protein sources.
Mm, yes, yes. Well, we'll end with, I want to ask a question. Would you say from like a CrossFit competition standpoint, are you far enough out from the competition to have thought about, where your goals are? Are you still like going for it, or
Yeah.
have you hit the peak? What are our goals moving forward?
Yeah, thanks for asking. That's a good question. I've been reflecting a lot this past week. Haven't been working out as much, just kind of resting. And I'm gonna try a high rocks competition. If you've heard of high rocks, uh,
Yes.
yeah, you would do great in that with your CrossFit background, but then also running. Uh, you should do
I
one.
was going to tell you, well, I want to do one. I was going to ask you if you would do it because I feel like you would crush that. It takes away you got to have strength, but not like all the strength.
Yeah, it's everything that I love in CrossFit, but without like a heavy barbell. So, but you still got to be strong. Just a lot of running. So yeah, I'm gonna do a high rocks competition in November, and then a bunch of like local competitions, but with CrossFit. But I really am thinking this has been such a fun journey for me. It's a hobby. It's a passion project. But it takes so much of my mind and my energy and my thought life. And Hampton, we were talking about this before we were live, but it's just, you have a daughter now, and you've had to restructure your training and the amount of time that you put into to yourself. That doesn't mean you don't put time into yourself anymore, but the more I'm thinking about, what really matters in my life, and Lord willing, hopefully my husband and I will have kids in the future, but I really just want to start structuring my life now to where it's not as selfish. And I don't say that to say that training for something is bad. Like, this has been something that I believe the Lord really gave me a platform through, and that I should have worked hard in it and all that. But thinking about the future, I don't think it's wise for me to continue striving in the way that I am to keep making it just to semifinals every year. And
Mm,
so I haven't fully arrived on this yet. I'm just verbally processing, but I think this is my last year, at least for a while, of trying to make it in CrossFit. And I really want to invest some of that time and energy into the people in my life, and then hopefully kids. And yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at with it. But I'll still have goals. I'll still sign up for races and try to use my fitness, especially that I've worked for 8 years to get. But man, CrossFit training it takes up, I mean, it's like 4 to 5 hours in the gym, and then you gotta recover, and it is a selfish endeavor. And anyone who tells you that training at a high level is not a selfish endeavor, you can do your best to allocate your time, but it is. And in the way I've done it, I don't want to continue to do that for forever.
yeah, and it's not just the 45 hours a day. It's on the weekends.
Yeah.
Probably being mindful of what you're eating when you're out, and then trying to go to bed early at night. And so it kind of, I know it can be your whole life, and so
Yeah.
I'm excited for you. The High Rocks thing is going to be awesome. I'll talk to you about that offline because I want to sign up for one of those too. But but really, I mean, so much of this podcast for me is like, I know we have a lot of young people listening, and I often say you're not going to be able to lead other people one day if you don't know how to lead yourself. And a big
Yeah.
part of leading yourself is learning a lot of this nutrition and fitness stuff. And no, you don't have to be Ellie. You don't have to take it to that level. But start eating a little bit more protein, do some strength training, follow Ellie. There's a lot to learn from her. But we got to end by you telling everybody to wake up and lead. So
Love
it's
it.
time for you and me.
To wake up and lead.
Yes.